Rabbi, you learn from it. So it's my schus that Rabbi is going to be addressing the Olam now.
The schus is mine, believe me. And Loi, I thank you for the shevach that I don't deserve. I'll take it as a bracha for the future, Mirza Hashem. I also want to thank the sponsors tonight, and I'm supposed to share a vart on the parsha, and I think that I can't say it's a Hasidic vart, but I have a little Hasidic blood. My father, his name was Simcha Bunim. I'm Avim Yitzchak. I married, as you all know, into a Choshev Gera mishpacha, so I can claim a little bit of Hasidic shaykhis. The Makos, only one of the Makos do we find something very unusual in Paro's pleading that it should stop. By the Makkah of Borod, it's only by that Makkah, he confesses and he says, Chotosi apam, Hashem HaTzadik v'anivam b'Harshaim. It's a remarkable statement. He never says it by any of the other Makkos, and this is the only one where he says it. That he's the Rasha, him and his nation are the Rishoyim, and Hashem HaTzadik. What is special about Borod? So I think the answer is pashut, because we have one thing by Borod that we don't have by all the other Makkos, and it very much could lead Paro into saying what he said. Because a few psukim earlier, the pasuk says, in pasuk of Dalit, it says, "Vayhivard ve'esh mislakachas besoch habarad," that there was fire that was burning inside of each piece of barad. Rashi says famously, "Nes besoch nes." It's a special nes. Not only did the barad come down, but the eish and the barad muravim, they were mixed together, fire and ice. And barad is water. Barad mayimhu. But lasos etzon konam asu shalom beinehem. According to Medrash, Rashi says that to do the ratzon of Hashem, they made shalom. The opposites came together, because opposites though they were, they came together because ratzon Hashem was what mattered. So I think that if you think about what Avodah Zarah is, it's something similar to what we have today in sports teams. Everybody picked a team. We don't have the Yetzer Hara anymore, the Avodah Zarah, but there was a certain philosophy, so to speak, behind it. And the Mitzrayim worshipped the Nilus, the Nile, the Nahar, and they worshipped the sun. There were different teams. Some throughout history, you had Avodah Zarah, where they worshipped this animal, that animal, the ground, the sky, the sun, the moon. Everybody picked a team. And sometimes the team won, sometimes the team lost, depending upon whether one's personal Avodah Zarah was on the ascendant or whether it was defeated by another one. I think maybe the residue of Avodah Zarah lies in the sports realm today. But it was a very similar kind of thing. What Paro saw in the Barad was that people worshipped Aish. We have documentation of that. And people worship, like the Mitzrayim did, water of the Nile. And they're misnagdim to one another. If one's winning, the other's losing because he's stronger. But here, Paro saw that there's something above all these various elements and animals and things that people associated power with. All the Avodah Zarahs he saw were not really powers at all, because opposites came together. Water and fire, which can't coexist by any natural means, coexisted in the Barad. And maybe it made him think about the fact that Lasos Etzon Konam, in order to do the will of Hashem, they came together, and that there's something beyond and above all of the various Elohim with a lowercase, with a hey, meaning diminutive. That Elohim are just powers. El means a power, but there's Elohim above it all, the source and the controller of all the powers. And I think that there's a vart in here for us as well, because we are also made up of Eish and Mayim. Every human being is made up of misnagdim. We have a guf, we have a neshama. And they don't want the same thing. Each one's fighting for what it wants. And the only way to make shalom beinehem is the same way that the Eish and the Mayim made shalom beinehem. And that is lasos ritzon konehem. If we want to do the ritzon kone, our kone, if we want to bring shalom we want to be maribeh shalom between our goof and our neshama. So the Torah gives us the ability to do that. It tells us how to use the goof in the service of the neshama, how the two together, and only the two together. Mitzvahs can't be done with a neshama. They need a goof to be done. How mitzvahs and staying away from averos are things that bring peace. They synthesize the goof and the neshama, and that's what we're supposed to be doing in order to lasos ratzon kolam. That's the vart I wanted to share. And I also want to share, obviously, because that's why I'm here, to share a thought or two about my shvera, Zichrono Livracha. He was indeed, as Rav Lowy said, a very special man. He was about diktuk, both the diktuk hamitzvahs, and he knew diktuk very well. He taught me many, many things that somehow they didn't teach us in yeshiva, but he knew. He knew Lashon Kodesh to a tremendous degree, and understood how it worked, what the mechanism of diktuk is. And he was a mechanech par excellence. He was one of the things that my shwager Rav Mordechai discovered in the house after the Petira was a letter from Torah Masorah dated 1950, inviting him. He was in Europe, inviting him to come and speak at a chinuch convention of some sort that was focused on how best to teach orphans. His reputation, and those days, 1950, you didn't have the internet, and you barely had any communication abilities. They heard about his success in Europe teaching the orphans from the war, and they wanted to bring him, expense paid, to the United States to speak to mechanechim about this. I don't think anyone has any idea whether he did this or not. And he never talked about it because that's the kind of person he was. He would not talk about these things. He was a braggart, he was not, and that's an understatement. But it says something about his reputation at the time, that he was known even on these shores when he was still in Europe. But what I want to share about him that I think is the most powerful lesson that I learned from him. I owe him much. First of all, I owe him for his daughter that he allowed me to marry. And I owe him for all that he taught me. And I owe him for the wonderful sense of humor that he exhibited. He once told me that as he got older, he said, I became an avodah zarah. I said, what's the you became an avodah zarah? So he said, because it says, Einaim lehem lo yiru, aznaim lehem lo yishmo. So he said, I became an avodah zarah because my eyes and my ears don't work so well anymore. So that was an example of his sense of humor. And he was always made you smile. But what I feel was the most powerful thing I learned from him was Pashut to be Makir Tov. Makir Tov HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what we have. He had every reason to be a very angry person, considering what he went through. And yet, he was always a person who, even though he was sensitive and he remembered the camp years, and anyone who wants to read about his experiences, Destined to Survive is the book that he wrote, and Mati said at the Levi at the airport, it was very true. He said his father doesn't want Hespedim, but anybody who wants to glean what a Hesped would say, all he has to do is read that book. Indeed, that's the case. But what I remember him saying on more than one occasion, when there was a family simcha and everybody was gathered together and all the kinderlach were running around, and he looked at his children and his grandchildren and his ureiniklach, and he was bowled over. He used to quote the Navi Yeshayahu. He said, "Miyolad li es eleh." Where did these come from? Hinani nisharti levadi. I was all by myself. He was lying in a pile of corpses at the end of the war, fearful that the Nazis who came back to burn down the camp would find him and realize he wasn't one of the corpses, Baruch Hashem. And he would look around and say, where did all these people come from? Eila Efohim. That's because he was somebody who had Hakaras HaTov, recognized that despite all that he had been through and all the reasons he would have to be upset and to feel that his life was a terrible life, he didn't feel that at all. He looked around and he was just flabbergasted at his good fortune. Where it came from? He was raised up to see doros and doros of people, young people and older people, who were all following in the footsteps of Yisrael Saba as he guided them. And that's something that I think we all can learn from, because there are times when it's human nature to say, "Oh, why does this happen to me? Why am I going through this? Why do I have this?" And we often don't stop enough and look around and see all the brachas we have. He was somebody who had all the memories from the war and all the pain from the war, but he also recognized that all that was in the past, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu had given him tremendous gifts. We all have those gifts, and that's the lesson that I carry with me among all the other ones, but most prominently from his life.
Thank you, Rabbi Shafran. Thank you for the personal message. A lot of times when you write, you're writing it from one place, and hearing this, it's coming from a different place, and it's very much appreciated. I know he did have a tzavah not to make hespedim, and I have to reiterate, and a disclaimer, this is not a hesped, and we're sitting and schmoozing and we're talking about memories. I think it would behoove us that Mayor Tenenbaum and Rabbi Avram Weisbrod want to share memories as well. So Mayor, if you want to unmute yourself and share with us your thoughts.
Yes, I just have a couple of things to say, and since I wasn't able to go to the shiva, and usually there you schmooze about about the person and about memories that you have of them, but really the first time I met Rabbi Yitzchak Cohen was my bar mitzvah teacher. So I was around 12 years old, and it was me and two other boys, Shmuel Younger and David Markovic. So we used to go to the Alert Real Estate office, and we would have our lessons there. Anyway, from that I became a Balkari, and I don't know if I had another teacher, would I have become a Balkari perhaps, but definitely, right, he influenced me. And when that becomes part of your life, that's part of your mahus, that defines you, and he therefore changed my life. So I have to have a lot of hakar satov. And of course, over the years we kept in touch, and he was very good friends with my father, Alav Shalom. And as the Gera representative in Toronto, anytime we would have to send something to the Rebbe, so it was always Rabbi Yitzchak Cohen who father would call him, and he would send the kvitlach or write the kvitlach out for us. And just a lot of memories there. And I owe a lot of thanks to him because of that. And I just wanted to mention that. I have a lot of hakar satov.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. And we can all testify that if Mayor is a Talmud and he's a fantastic Balkari, I can only imagine, although I did hear your Shver, Eli, and your father lane many times, because him and my father, Alav Shalom, was also Balkari, and I remember them really being medaked Kutzah Shel Yud a few times. And they were about the same height. They were very tall in stature. So they saw eye to eye in these matters. Rabbi Avram Weisbrod, who's Daf Yomi Magachir for a long time in our shul, also wanted to share memories. And once again, this is not Divrei Hesped.
To speak about Rab Yitzchak in a past term, it's very, very hard, because anything to do with past term didn't exist by Rab Yitzchak. He lived the day for the day. He didn't want to discuss or to remember the past, because the past is not around anymore and it can't bring anything to the future. Rabbi Avram Giti Yedid was here in Toronto. Now during the Shiva, told me a good word. He told me that in middle of this terrible Gehenim that he went through in Europe, came the Rosh Chodesh we just finished celebrating today, Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And Shchulitzke had his good friend, Rabbi Shafran. He was a very, very good friend, a brotherhood sharing of tzures together in the time of darkness in Europe. And he told him, you know, Yosel, you know what Shvat stands for? Tovu ba'oretz she'orer. A pasuk in Eicha. So Beis Hamikdash is drowned in underground. But Rabbi Carmel right away fixed him up, and he told him, Shchulitzke, the Rebbe zug, as Shvat mach shulem, brucho toivo. Whoever knows Shchulitzke, he was a person full of hope. He wasn't a person that wanted to say a pasuk of Eicho, that to bring it in the time of darkness and to look for being depressed or to look for destruction of Beis Hamikdash, that we are going through destruction. So what was really the machloikes between Reb Shchulitzke and a good friend, Rabbi Carmel? Rabbi Carmel learned the Gemara, and he says, "The tovu ba'oretz she'orer." We know the story. The Gemara says in Kiddushin that Rabbi Avohu had a son of Vimi who was mechabed av to no end. Once he brought him a cup of tea, and he was menamnem, and he was sitting aside and waiting till his father will wake up. And during this time, he found a pshat that bothered him a long time. It says, Mizmor le'osov, Elokim ba'u goyim benachlosecho. We are discussing now on the destruction, bad times in Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. Mizmor le'osov, kino le'osov miboyim. And all of a sudden, he found the pshat, waiting to respect his father with the cup of tea. The pshat is Mizmor le'osov. It's time to praise the Eibishter, that he didn't punish us in our gufim, he didn't destroy us completely. Eitzit esh betzion, kilo chamoson al eitzim va'avonim, apach nishbo v'anachnu nimloten. Mizmor le'osov. That wasn't really what Rabbi Carmel was looking in Shvat. Tovu ba'oretz she'orer, kilas chamos al eitzim va'avonim. Something that it is all the powerful nechome, it's still full of pain. But Reb Shchulitzke told him, you should know, Tovu ba'oretz she'orer is a moiridike, hopeful thing. Don't learn the Gemara kipshuto. Look around in Toises in the same page. Toises bring, ach yesh bemedrash. Toises bring a medrash. She'osaf omar shire al shetovu ba'oretz she'orer. And Toises bring the moshu, leshivcho. She'ol cholishav mayim min habe'er. A poor woman is going to draw water from the well. V'nofel kadol habe'er, she had a little bit of she has a small bucket, she draw the water with, and she lost the bucket in the depth of this well. She lost everything she had. The only thing that she could bring the water up is her bucket, and now she lost it. All of a sudden, it's not the regular shifcho, it's not the regular woman in the woman that helps at home for the regular person. It's the woman that helps the melech, and she had a gold bucket. Fell to the well as well. So the poor woman started to praise. Till now, it lost. My bucket is gone and nobody could save it. Why? It's a very cheap dish. Nobody is carrying it. For me, it means a lot. I need to draw the water with it, but there's no value by itself. Now you have a bucket next to it of gold. Whoever is going to save the gold bucket will save my bucket of cheres as well. So Litzchak is sitting now in the middle of Gehenom. The whole world is in fire. He tells to himself, Tovu ba'oretz she'orer. Tovu ba'oretz she'orer, not the medrash of Kilo Hashem, Kilo Chamoso Aleitzim ve'avodim. Tovu ba'oretz she'orer means the Eibishter as the Beis Hamikdash. He never let it go. He was going with it. He didn't bury it. He didn't bury it in a way that will never come back to life. He was going with it. He put it in a very, very, very precious place to guard it till he will take it. The Eibishter will take his Sheorim. The Eibishter will take us too. We are here now in the middle of the darkness, but any minute, any day, the same Eibishter is going to take his gold Sheorim, will take us with a full bitochen, a full emunah. Yes, Shvat is Tovu Ba'oretz She'orer. It's very hopeful. The Eibishter is going to save us any minute. He lived it in Europe in the time of darkness. When came to other countries, what he went through wasn't any better. Wasn't the same suffering of them, but wasn't. But always with the full hope. And this is the hope that kept him alive till the last minute. And he lived this particular hope from minute one till the last minute. And one thing that kept him with his hope was his Rebbe. The Rebbe. I live day by day because of the Rebbe. When he finished the war, he built, Baruch Hashem, a beautiful family. His son, the first son that was born, would be naturally, you should call him Pinchas Eliezer after his father, especially as he became a Yosem in such a young age. But no, he called him after his Rebbe. Why? Because the Rebbe kept him alive. While he was in the darks of darkness, he didn't have his father to keep him alive. But the Rebbe kept him alive. ממילא, שהוא מביאו לחי עולם הבא, ממילא כבודו קודם, and he called it. We should all be zeiche to be hopeful and to see that Tovu she'orer ba'oretz will become these gold she'orim that are now even will come up and will be zeiche to be in Beis Hamikdash, and we should see this beautiful she'orim with our own eyes, gesundheit.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Weisbrod. Thank you. Since you're here anyway, Rabbi Shafran, I don't know what the ikr, what the tuffle is. Of course, you're here to provide a proper send-off and a goodbye, a litraot to your shver. But since you're here, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask a few questions about your work in general, if that's okay. I hope you all stay with us. We're going to discuss the current events. And from what I understand with you, Shver, he understood what it means that Yiddishkeit is living in the given moment. Certainly we have some moments that are requiring our full emunah. So I have to thank you for your weekly articles. You know, I tried, our Rav always tells us to read as little as possible from outside media on Shabbos. So I get on me on occasion and I'll read Rabbi Kamenetsky and Rabbi Taub. Now, since you started writing, you're obligating me to read you as well. And then I have to go through other parts as well. But first of all, thank you. You always write with cerebrally, with subtlety and with humor, and you're very honest in your writings. And it's appreciated very, very much. And I know you've written extensively about the state of the Jewish Union. So my first question is about media in general. Media is meant to be unbiased. Can Jewish media be unbiased?
Well, there are two levels. First of all, thank you for reading me, and please don't feel obligated to.
Okay.
There are better things you can do with your time. There are two levels to this question. One is about the general media, and the other is about the frum media. And the answer to both is, of course, not. There's no such thing as an unbiased medium, and no such thing as even a news story is always going to carry if not blatantly, then at least subtly, the bias of the person who's writing. There's no way to avoid that. All people can do is try their best to present different sides of an issue, whatever it might be. When it comes to a frum organ, obviously there has to be a bias. The bias has to be a bias born of sensitivity to the fact that we're talking to a readership or viewership that are maminim. We don't use our media to talk to people outside of us. We're happy if they want to listen to us, but we recognizing who our audience is, we obviously are going to be biased, and it's understood that we're biased, and we're rightfully biased to take a stance based on Torah and based on the Masorah and based on Yiddishkeit. But that aside, even if one is totally committed to presenting a frum viewpoint, a viewpoint informed by Torah, many of the issues that media deal with are political ones or social ones that are not necessarily affected by Yiddishkeit. They don't have a connection to it. Could be a political issue or something. And there, we suffer from the same biases that the general press does, which is that whoever's doing the writing is going to allow his or her personal feelings about things come through, even if they're trying to present a supposedly objective point of view. This is a problem, and as I say, it's a problem in general media, it's a problem in frum media. And the only way to deal with it is to try to get different points of view. I'm very much of the personal opinion, I'm speaking here just as an individual, not on behalf of the Aguda, personally of the feeling that that there is a dearth of different points of view in much of the frum media, and that's a problem. That we tend to speak in one voice, which is usually very nice if there's no other voice to be spoken in, but we often have a certain assumption. We assume, for instance, just to take an example, out of the blue, that everything Israel, as the country Israel does, is good and wonderful and must be defended. There is certainly a point of view that is legitimate that will criticize Israel in certain cases, and that gets our dander up. Many of us, it makes us say, "Well, what is this? This person's anti-Semitic because he's saying that Israel did something wrong." I mean, let's face it, Israel, we've all become Zionim. I don't know how else to put it. The rah rah rah, everything Israel does is right, and and Likud is Mashiach Zeiten. That's not true. And even though we should never Chalila pile on when the people who are taka anti-Israel level their criticisms, neither should we become cheerleaders for a particular party, no matter how long it's been in power in Israel. It's just one example of many that I could give, where I think that we shouldn't be talking to ourselves and just reiterating the biases that we have, but we should be open to other points of view. That is seen as a terrible thing by many people, but I happen to believe that it's something that's important. The same way that in the general press, the only way to get any semblance of MS is to sample the different biases. If a person has the misfortune of having to follow the news, then the only way he's going to understand, for instance, the American political scene is if he visits or he reads very conservative points of view and very liberal points of view, both of which are equally biased. And then by ferreting out the kernel of truth in this, and if there is a kernel of truth in the other, you can synthesize that and do a little research and figure out who is closer to the MS and what perhaps one's own personal approach should be. It's a exasperating task sometimes, but there's no way to really get close to the truth unless one is willing to sample different points of view and not just live in an echo chamber, which so many people in the Welt in general are doing today. They just watch and listen and read things that confirm their biases rather than try to think objectively about issues that deserve that.
So I just to reiterate what you're saying is that the difficulty in seeing another point of view outside of your own.
Yes, and outside of the standard one. As I say, the standard one when it comes to the example I gave was Israel. Standard one is that Israel can do no wrong, and I don't think that that's I don't think that's MS. Israel is not Malchus Beis David. And there are those of us who have not jumped on the Zioni bandwagon, but much of the film world has. We've become the biggest cheerleaders of Likud that exist out there. I mean, we are it. The whole Jewish world and even the non-Jewish world sees the Orthodox community as being the most Israel firsters. And even though I do believe that Israel tries its best to act in the best possible way. And I definitely feel that it's unfairly smeared. At the same time, again, it's not perfect. And we can't pretend that I don't think we should pretend that it's perfect. We should be willing, at least within our own machbeh, to be willing to be critical of things that might deserve criticism.
And I want to get to another point, but just to finish this one off, is our minds shaped because of the amount of news that we're getting? I mean, we used to hear a piece of news once an hour. Now we're hearing it once a minute.
Yeah, it definitely is. But then again, it's not so much the amount of news that we get as it is where the quality of it and where it's coming from. You know, we tend to just get news from people and places that tell us what we want to hear. And same way as lahavdo elef havdalos, when you're learning, you gain the most from a chavrusa who's going to argue with you and present a different point of view. That's true by any interaction that involves ferreting out the truth, whether it's the truth in a Gemara, it's the truth in again lahavdo, a political issue or a social issue. Yeah, one has to see the other point of view, even if it ends up strengthening your own because you were mitaritz all the kashas you had, but at least ask the kashas and be mitaritz them. And if you can't be mitaritz them, admit that you can't be mitaritz them and realize teiku.
Okay, I want to move on to another question about the state of Orthodoxy in America. Many years ago, you wrote an article in Coalition, and we discussed it before. You said you wrote it half jest, but for those who didn't see it, Rabbi Shafran talked about that maybe there is something to learn from Chabad, how they spread out and moved to different communities. And one day we'll see Hasidim in Green Bay. Now, everybody on this call thinks I liked it because you mentioned Chabad, which I have a propensity and I'm associated with Chabad. But the reality is I enjoyed the words Green Bay because nobody mentions Green Bay unless it's associated with the football team. Right, so that caught my eye in the article, and I kept the article for many years, but somewhere it's gone. But you suggested from people to move out, and the price of real estate then in the mid 90s, when I think you wrote the article, is certainly what was more affordable than it is today. Where do you see the demographic and geographic movement of Orthodox people today?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Green Bay. The reason I picked Green Bay is because I was trying to use alliteration. I wanted the Satmar to move to Sioux City, and I wanted the Gerer to move to Green Bay, and I had a whole list of other Hasidim and the Litvische moving to different places. I think maybe the Litvische Welt to Louisiana. I don't remember what it was, but I was just trying to be cute. But as you noted, there was a sense of seriousness in that article as well. And that is because I think that big cities do terrible things to people. And I think that Fum people are not, just like the Rambam says, you know, it's the nature of a person. He says in Hilchos Deis that it's the nature, the teva of a person. There's no way to get around it, that you are mushpa from your surroundings. Cities tend to present very, very challenging surroundings. People are ruder and they're less civilized, and there's much more the crowdedness brings out the worst in people. And when you raise children in a big city, it's an avoda to prevent that from seeping into children's their essences. We were zocha, my wife and I, to raise our children in a small out-of-town community, two of them actually, but mostly in Providence, Rhode Island, which is a small, Hamish, small. You know, it was wonderful because for many reasons, but mainly because it wasn't a big city. When we moved to New York, it was a different environment, and I always said that I would never, ever, ever move to New York, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu laughed and arranged things that pushed me into New York. But I wouldn't choose New York as a place to raise children. And I just had this fantasy that what if groups of Yidden of similar minhagim and mindsets would move as groups into the hinterlands of the United States? They would gain the small town chen, and they could still maintain a cohesiveness born of their similar interests and similar minhagim and whatnot. And to a degree, I think that has happened. It wasn't it wasn't propelled by my article. It was propelled by economic necessity. But obviously Brooklyn is no longer a place where young people are settling. They're moving. Well, first they moved to Lakewood, which was the obvious choice. But Lakewood has expanded into other communities, nearby, and other communities, community kollalim, have opened in far-flung places, including some rather small communities that have grown a bit larger since. And I think that that's a healthy thing, and that even though there's a wonderful mila to living in a big city, that you have pizza places, your assortment of eateries, and all of the other amenities that come with a big city, and more important things, of course, as well, the choice of shuls, the choice of a whole gamut of rabbanim and yeshivas. Obviously, that's a mila, but there are other milas that you can have in a big city, and I think that people should be encouraged to, if they are finding that they can't live in a big city, they shouldn't see that as a nebuch situation, but as a prod that perhaps they should consider moving to a small community, which has its challenges, but tremendous milas as well.
Thank you. Yossi, before we finish, Yossi, Simon, if you have any other questions, if anybody has questions that they'd like to ask Rabbi Shafran, by all means, please raise your hand or unmute and ask yourself. The Rav in our circle always has the first and last word, and he'll be joining us shortly for a bracha. First of all, congratulations then on the 500th issue. And I did notice that I think it was Rabbi Kamenetsky who said, well, it's a blessing, but it's also, it's not a big mark. It's number 500, and really 501 is just as big as 500. Right.
Yeah, it's like someone who's shown a Mishnah so 101 times. But I do want to make clear that I was involved in the creation of AMI to a degree. I was one of the original editors there, but I don't really have a shaykhis beyond my column to the magazine, so I don't even see it. So I'll be honest with you, I don't want anyone to take the fact that I write for it, whether it's Hamodia or whether it's AMI or whether it's a non the Forward or Haaretz or the New York Times or anywhere else where I've written. It's not necessarily a haskama of any sort for the medium, because I'm not a mashkiach, and if I were, I'm sure things would be all the newspapers and magazines would be much smaller than they are.
I have another question to touch upon. I mean, you spent a lot of time defending orthodoxy, whether it is to the reform or the conservative. What is the battle really that orthodoxy has now? I think we've persuaded people where the Orthodox profile is now out there in popular culture in various forms, and people have learned that we don't have horns, we don't have tails. What's your message then to the conservative reform if those movements still exist?
Well, they are dwindling, no question about it. There was a famous it was already many years in the past. There was a little item in the New York Times has a little column, I forgot what it's called, where people just tell little vignettes about things that happened to them. And one of them had someone who overheard a conversation between two elderly ladies, Jewish ladies, sitting in a park. And one said to the other one, "Oh, I hear you have a new grandchild. What's his name?" And the woman, neither one is from, the woman says his name is Baruch. And the other one says, "Well, that's an interesting name." And she says, "Yes, he's named after his grandfather, his great-grandfather, Brad." And I think that said a lot, because I don't know if I had the names exactly right, but you get the gist of it, is that things have come around, and that there's no question that the Orthodox community is the only one that's thriving, even in the freedoms of America with all of the challenges. So I think just we have to keep on doing what we're doing, and allow there's no fights to fight, particularly at the moment. Let people see what we are. Halavai, they should only see good. Unfortunately, people tend to pick out the worst examples in order to, again, confirm their preconceptions. But the more we can set an example, each one of us, and I always say every Yid is a walking Jewish billboard. If you look from, then people are going to judge all of Frumkeit based on you. And that means if you're in traffic and you cut somebody off, you've just done something terrible. You haven't been caused Hashem to be mishayev al yadcha. And if you do something nice, you hold the door open for somebody who's struggling with a package to get into a store, then you hold that door open for the person, and he'll think of Frumkeit and Frum Yidden. You'll be the example that he'll think of. I think that our bigger challenge is not so much with the outside Jewish world, but with ourselves. With growth comes a certain complacency, and it's nothing new. Mitzvah Anoshim Lumada. It's so easy to become just keep on keeping on and not concentrating and thinking about what we're doing. When you have minyanim at any moment of the day and night to go to, and people are not necessarily they're not necessarily cognizant of what it means to daven, and to daven with a minyan, and to say the words, and to think about the words to the degree that one can. We should never Chalila become just a social movement where we're going through the actions without the thought behind it. When Frum Yidden were not plentiful in America, our fathers and grandfathers were forced to be committed, truly committed, and aware of what they were doing. Today it's so easy that we run the risk of not thinking about what we're doing and who we are and what our achrayus is. And sometimes you can go through a whole day and not see anybody but people like yourself. And that leads to a certain complacency that I think is our biggest challenge today. We're no longer fighting the battle of reform, even though there are cases where we have to speak up, specifically regarding Eretz Yisrael and things like that. But I think that our biggest enemy, like Pogo famously said, is ourselves. That we have to be very, very aware of not just doing the right thing, but recognizing why we're doing it and doing it the right way.
Thank you. We're just about out of time. Daf Yomi starts, of course, on channel
Can I
8.
just say one word?
Yeah, go ahead. More than one.
I know that I wasn't prepared, but there was just an insight I wanted to share. Is that I asked the Shaila about when you start saying Kaddish, you're supposed to have in mind the Nifta Iskadla Iskadla Shmei Rabba. Like what's in it? So the Rav told me that I guess he was basing it on the story. I think the Pnei Menachem used to say, he said over when the Imam Emes was Nifta, that the Imam Emes told him he should make sure to say Kaddish. Why? Because when the Yid is here, there's a Gvaldi Kedusha in the world. When Yid is not in the world, so it's missing Kedusha. And when you say Iskadla Shmei Rabba, that's most of Kedusha in the world. So he said he should say Kaddish, a lot of Kaddish, when the Gross Yid is Niftis, failed to Sach Kedusha. So he should say a lot of you should say a lot of Divrei Kedusha. So when he told me this, I thought of, it reminded me of the Tfer Shloime I saw a long time ago. Tfer Shloime Pashtus V'Yikra. It says, "Odav kiyakim mikem korban min behema." Now, a person wants to feel his skavis to Hashem, he should be right from a behema. And what was heist? Just like a person, a behema is a shtik behema, and you say reizu oila, it shafsa kedusha on the behema, even though nothing's changed. So a person should take a chizik on that and say, "Wow, look what kind of kedusha is in me. If my diburim could shafa kedusha on the behema just like that, so look at the kedusha I have in me." And kavuchoyme, every word of Torah and tefillah has to be mechazik himself, and like this you can feel a skavis to Hashem that with the Gvald kedusha that's in him, even if he doesn't feel it, but just make the cheshbon, and he realize what's for kedusha he has in him. So I thought that this would be a Gavaldik Gezach, not just when I say Kaddish, in every Torah, in everything, especially like many people told me there was a story that the Pittsburgh Rebbe, the father of the one that was just Nifta, that he had chodesh, and somebody offered, a big millionaire offered him that that he'll pay off all his chodesh on t'nai that he could sit next to him in Gan Eden. So he says, well, mitzidi I'm asking, but you should know that whoever went through the lagers, ever went through the Holocaust, they have a special mechitza. They can't, you can't go. They have no shachas. With me, personally, I have no problem. But I'm sorry, I can't let you in with me because it's a special mechitza. But so Kim is that what Hashem wanted even though I have no shaykhs to say to my father's mechitza, where he now, but Hashem, Dvar Hashem is I should say Kaddish for him. So even though I'm nowhere near his mechitza, but I have to say Kaddish. So my avoid should be is that I should say Kaddish, not just plain Kaddish. I should have in mind that the Beis Shloimeh, that everything I say is Shafs Kedusha, and maybe that way I should penetrate the mechitza because I'm doing Ratzon Hashem. And not just in Kaddish, on Torah and Tefillah, and every time I do, I feel and I hold myself back from Mechem Yetzer. But the punchline is, I was reviewing things that my father told me over the years, and I came across this thing, mamish, that he told me, he was telling me that says, that the person words go up to Shemaim, and somebody says, "If any knows, you become like a Kohen Gadol." That stupid behemoth becomes Kodesh from Rezu Oila. And in that conversation, I told him about the Tzeh Shloimeh, and he liked it. So I see his mamish I should be able to. I thought of this thing and this should be takas. I should act this way, and this should be a schis for his neshama.
Amen.
Shkoyach. Before the Rav gives a final bracha and sums everything up, I want to thank, of course, Rabbi Shafran for coming on, the COHEN family, the Norman family, as well as Mayor Tenenbaum and Rabbi Weisbrod. Please join us in 2 weeks from now for Tu B'Shvat. We have a very special Tu B'Shvat program. I hope you can join us. Rabbi Lowy, go ahead.
I just want to mention, first I want to thank Rabbi Shafran and the whole family. And Yisrael Yitzchak was a walking Kiddush Hashem. Everything, the way he spoke and the way he acted was the biggest Kiddush Hashem. And the biggest Kiddush Hashem is the beautiful family that he left over. I wasn't able to go personally Machmavel because of the COVID. So I want to be Machmavel the whole family. But in the name of the whole Aguda and everyone, he was somebody that was a walking Kiddush Hashem person that you could emulate to see a person who would never do anything to hurt anybody, but was always so careful to give cover to every person. I remember every time I came back from a convention, Rabbi Shafran, and this was his, Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Shafran, that the schus of everything that everyone does is everything really his schus. I should call it everyone that does, and Rabbi Shafran, we should all be cycled together. The Kehanim should go back to go with the Vedasam, the Vim, the Chonim, we should be cycled to see the Gula B'Meir B'Yameinu. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shkoyach to the Rav. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yasher Koyach.
See you.
What's that? Oh, sick. And the truth is, you can probably request a recording of it because I see on the top of the page that
שיהייני אוי אוי למען חסדך Shabbos kodesh himilizoy Thank you.